you trigger a lot more animus than I do, because one could argue that I actually, on any given Tuesday morning, will tweet as many, if not more, things that are quite, quote, controversial. And yet somehow now, obviously your platform is larger than mine, but even if we correct for that, even if we do it per capita, there seems to be something. And by the way, I've been asked that many times when I appear on shows, because people know that we're friends and they'll ask me, how come you don't get, so let me turn it to you since we're now chatting. Do you have a theory as to why you are such a polarizing figure? Whereas, one can argue I take positions, I'll criticize Islam a lot more forcefully than you do. And yet somehow I don't trigger as much animus. What do you think is the driving
Maybe
force?
I annoyed people on more fronts simultaneously than you did. Partly, so what happened? This is a possible explanation. When things first blew up around me in 2016, I already had 200 hours of lectures on YouTube. And so, I was pilloried as a right-wing demon, essentially, by the sorts of people that we're discussing who like to do that sort of thing to hide their own character, let's say. And then people looked me up online and went to my YouTube channel and then found, this extra hundreds of hours of content, which demonstrated rather incontrovertibly that I wasn't the sort of person that I was being accused of being, but also touched on all sorts of other topics that people might not have expected, like in the religious and mythological domain, the psychoanalytic domain. And so I think the fact that I had that storehouse of lectures already stored up when the trouble emerged expanded out my reach in a very dramatic manner. And that's probably, as the first occupier of that position in some ways, because I was an early adopter of YouTube. I know you were too, but, I think I got there a little faster than you did and a little broader. And so I think that's probably a fair bit of it,
I wonder also like in my latest book now, which I guess we'll talk about in a second, I also engage in prescriptive remedies. Here are some steps by which you can increase your happiness. But historically, I've been much more of a descriptive psychologist, right? I describe how things are. Now, in your case, by virtue of you also having been a clinician, by definition, you engage in the ecosystem of prescriptions a lot more. And that, I think, triggers people's ire because you're telling them how to behave. And by doing that, you're obviously going to alienate people. Whereas I come along and I say, here are the evolutionary reasons why there are differences between men and women. And I stop there. Whereas by you taking the prescriptive jump, that probably augments the amount of animus that you receive. What do you think of that?
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable proposition as well. I also think we could develop that line of hypothesis a little further too. I think that many of the people who have an animus against me, and almost all those people are anonymous online trolls, by the way, because I never encounter that, or virtually never in my actual life. Quite the contrary. I think they're very, very irritated that my simple-minded prescriptions, like take some responsibility for yourself and don't play the victim because it's not good for you or for anyone else. I think they're very, very annoyed that, first of all, I'm calling them out on their hypothetically empathic virtue signaling attempts to escape from all possible responsibility, which is exactly what they're doing. And second, they're very annoyed that the simple ideas that I've been putting forward and the simple, somewhat conservative ideas in that they're traditional, they're very annoyed that those work. And then they're also annoyed because I have this very deep interest in religious issues that also, grates on people to some degree. And this is something you and I are going to talk about because it overlaps with our interest in memetic ideas, because religious ideas are memetic ideas, for better or worse, and we can talk about that. So, and then I think I'm also probably enabling, to the degree that I'm enabling young men and speaking to them about the virtues of their ambition instead of dismissing them as pathological, patriarchal oppressors. That's also very annoying, especially to the types of men that you're describing who want to sneak about in the background and pretend to be virtuous and harmless, which is a pretty damn pathetic way of comporting yourself, in my estimation. Like, I've watched those kind of men operate in the protests against me, and so I can be surrounded by a mob of pretty decent screaming harpies. And, they're annoying as can possibly be imagined. But when I look at the men that are with them, they just make my blood run cold. Like, and that's with my clinical eye, those are not good people. They're hanging around those women who are doing the harpy thing. And they're there as exactly the kind of parasitical predator that you're describing. And I can see that. And they're not the sort of person that you would want anyone you cared for to have any association with whatsoever. Plus, because they have to be sneaky fuckers in your terminology, they're bitter and resentful, and they're very likely to want to tear down anything that approximates true accomplishment, because all those who have true accomplishment are their genuine competitors. And that's partly why I think the radical left-wing authoritarians go after merit so assiduously, is that, they operate on a completely non-meritorious basis, and it's in their best interest to present merit itself as a falsehood to take out their sexual competitors.